All right, good morning, everyone. Today is Wednesday, December 20th, 2023, and I will call the meeting of this virtual task force stakeholder meeting on rule writing to order. Dr. Gandhi, if you could take roll call, please.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Ms. Walmsley,
Present.
Ms. Nair,
Here.
Mr. Dang,
I'm here.
Mr. Pond,
Here.
Ms. Howe,
Here.
Ms. Fine,
Here.
Mr. Boson, Mr. Boson. I see him, but I'll circle back with him.
Here. Present.
Thank you. Mr.
Welcome.
Morris,
Here.
okay. Ms. Davis, Ms. Davis, Ms. Almer, Michelle. I see her online. I just can't hear her. Ms. Sutcliffe.
Here.
Okay, and I think we also have Ben joining us. Ben Castaneda.
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, Michelle. Almer. We do have a quorum, Madam Chair, and Ms. Almer may have to fix her microphone because we can't hear her.
Terrific. Well, thanks everybody for being here. Does anyone have conflicts of interest that they would like to disclose before we jump into the agenda? All right, hearing none. Dr. Gandhi, do you want to direct me where you'd like to start? And I guess maybe pull up the proposed language on the screen.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Give me 1 second here. Madam Chair, I wanted to start with the controlled substance transfer rules. The DEA posted and amended their rules to allow for initial filling of a controlled substance to be transferred from one pharmacy to another in a closed contained process. I did send you guys the language that I drafted, but let me post it here so that we can all see the language that was shared with everybody. Everybody able to see this?
Yes, thanks, Cam.
So I'm hoping everyone had a chance to review it and we can go line by line to see what amendments I added and took out. There was a lot of, there was a section for transfer that was repeated for non-resident and resident. So I felt it there's not much of a difference. The world of pharmacy is getting smaller and transfers are done pretty consistently from state to state. So I didn't see the reason to have two different areas of non-resident resident transfers. But I'll entertain anybody's thoughts. I don't know why that was created that way, but it was. And so I wanted to eliminate some redundancy.
Kim, not a part that you have underlined or changed, but at the top, just starting off with E, it's redundant, the first two sentences, transfer prescription order information for transfer prescription order information.
So just take this out, you're saying?
Yeah. And then I also noted that under 3, where you added not to exceed the total volume prescribed, I was wondering if we should add and quantity just for the partial fills that might be hanging out.
From my perspective, I think the word quantity makes more sense than the word volume.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, they're kind of the same thing, but I think that's more commonly used in pharmacy practice in terms of
Yeah,
the
and that can
terminology.
be inclusive of any substance, form of substance. Agree.
Well, this section is for non-controlled.
Well, I meant like a compound, like if it's liquid or tablets.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask you a question on this? It's always bugged me a little bit. You're allowed to transfer it up to the number of originally authorized refills. So what if we only do a partial fill in the first place, but there's no refills authorized? Are we not allowed to transfer it, even though you filled it for 15 pills and there are 15 pills left? I've always understood you're allowed to transfer it as long as there were authorized pills left.
Yes. So maybe we should get rid of that first part of that statement then, Roger. So of the originally authorized refills may transfer up to the total quantity prescribed.
That feels right to me. I mean, I don't think you're going to do it, but in theory, you could transfer it 100 times if there were 100 pills and you transferred one pill of it,
Yeah.
keeps bouncing.
Well, we used to do that with Subutex because the patients could only afford one film at a time. Yeah, I like that.
So can you wordsmith that real quick for me? Is that number 3?
Yeah.
I
drug
think
is
the suggestion is
Is transferred without limitation, not to exceed the total quantity prescribed.
Agree.
Yeah. Start at only.
Okay, hang on. Start at only and leave this whole part right here.
No, strike to not.
Take out only up to the number of original authorized refills and so from only to and. There
Only
you go.
to and.
There you go.
All right.
we should also consider striking the word original in
Yeah.
number 3.
Agreed.
It's in 4A too.
Original's also in 2 and 1.
I think it has to be in 2 though, right? You can only transfer a scheduled drug once.
True.
But you could do it after the original fill.
And you could in
Well,
theory
and if-
transfer the original fill as well.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
filled first.
I'm okay with it. I'm okay striking is what I meant.
And I'm not sure if this DEA reference is still like the 0.25, if that is still the right citation for the new rule. Oh, okay.
They do still have that in place, yes.
Okay, cool.
But they also added just 1306.
Okay.
So what's a verdict on the word original? Do we need that?
Strike it.
You may want to reference in number 2 that 1306.25 is for the purposes of refill dispensing for those Schedule 3, 4s, and 5s, because you're adding language further down for 1306, and it's actually 0.08 for the new electronic transfer regulations. And in fact, in 1306.08, the DEA language is a pharmacy may transfer electronic prescription information for a controlled substance in Schedule 3, 4, and 5 to another pharmacy for the purpose of refill dispensing pursuant to Section 1306.25. You might just consider putting the DEA language in number 2.
Thoughts, guys?
I like that idea.
But Sandy, doesn't the DEA also allow you to transfer an original now if it comes in electronically?
Yeah, and that's stated somewhere below, Roger. So
Okay,
it's-
as long as you've got both, but that's fine.
Yeah, I think
Except for
right
they
here.
use the word forward, I think, don't they? It's not transfer.
Now, they actually changed it, Lori. They originally used forward,
Okay.
in the recent version went to transferred. I agree.
Okay, so for this number 2, Sandy, you're stating we should just cite the original language from the DEA. Sandy?
Sorry, I didn't unmute. In 1306.08, the language says a pharmacy may transfer electronic prescription information for a controlled substance in Schedule 3, 4, and 5 to another pharmacy for the purpose of refill dispensing pursuant to Section 1306.25.
Okay,
And that's paragraph I, so I think perhaps we can just copy the DEA language.
all right, I will pull that.
I had a question about E3.
Yep,
So E3, 7, and 8. There we go. Oh, up a little. Yeah, there we go. The name of the transferring pharmacist or intern and the receiving pharmacist or intern. What if it's a technician? You replaced it with maybe licensed.
I want to ask about that too. Under number 4, Kim,
yep.
it says or licensed individual. In my mind, that means technicians are allowed to transfer prescriptions to.
They are.
They are if they're delegated that authority, yes.
Correct.
Even with the C2, the controlled substances.
No.
No, there was an
no.
exclusion for controls.
Okay.
So on 7 and 8, maybe licensed individuals.
Language up further that had delegation. That kind of reference the delegation language came a little higher, I think. Right there.
We don't actually really use delegation languages in regards to interns. We use it in regards to technicians in their section.
Good point, Sandy.
Not to open up a can of worms, but to kind of piggyback on what Sandy said, on the topic of like personnel in the controlled substance transfer stuff down below, there's it says pharmacist to pharmacist only, but DEA defines pharmacist differently than we do in Arizona. So like they say that it's basically a pharmacist or anybody authorized by the pharmacist to do a certain task. So they don't exclude interns from transferring controls or doing anything unless specified. So we may want to strike like pharmacist to pharmacist in the controlled section since it's in conflict with DEA.
They talk about down here in the blue
Yes, it would be
between 2
3,
licensed
yes.
pharmacists.
correct.
But Sandy, is your point further up, not to make Cam go spinning here, is your point that maybe we should leave the 3 in there and then like it can be done by 2 licensed pharmacists, it can be done by an intern, or it could be done by other persons maybe it's delegated and authorized licensed individuals or something like that?
Yes, I would keep both the language and we do need to use, when interns are included, we need to state pharmacist and intern because we define pharmacist and interns separately, where the DEA includes interns in their definition of pharmacist.
Hmm.
Yeah, agreed.
So on this specific one that we're looking at, so 2 licensed pharmacists and then put 2
Interns. Oh,
or interns.
Can we just put it in number 1? Because then it could be any version. It could be intern pharmacist, whatever. And we're kind of getting into the weeds here by saying, well, intern, 2 licensed interns.
Yeah,
Can
that
we
looks good.
can we just leave it in this section here, which would then imply that any order can do the transfer involving a pharmacist or intern?
What if we just say that the transfer of information, leave little I, directly between licensed pharmacists or interns, comma, or, and then leave 2. Get rid of the 2 to make it clear that it could be any combination of.
Oh, make it all under 1?
Yeah, get rid of 2 in sub 1.
Or get rid of that.
Get rid of no. Get rid of the word 2 in number 1.
Yeah.
Because if the pharmacist is faxing it, they're really not transferring it to another person. They're faxing it. They're electronically sending it. The assumption is that a licensed person on the other end would receive it.
So then over here, number 2, should we just call out pharmacy technician instead of authorized individuals?
I think that's better.
Yes.
I'm good with that.
Can I throw one more slight wrinkle here and just ask it? I
Sure.
assume tech trainees should not be involved in this, but by saying licensed individuals, are we including them inadvertently?
So I think Kevin's suggestion there, authorized pharmacy technician, addresses that it couldn't be a trainee then, right?
Yes.
Oh, and the trainees are registered now. They're not licensed.
I know
Excellent
that's
point.
I spotted that, Mark. It's close. So is the
It is close.
authorization by the pharmacist, not by the board?
Hmm.
You're talking about this line, right, Roger?
Yeah. I just want, I believe tech trainees should not be doing this thing. I just want to make sure we're not inadvertently saying they can, if the pharmacist thinks they're allowed.
Well, this is
Well,
why
and-
we kind of changed it to an authorized pharmacy technician, Roger.
Mhm.
And it does
I
have, if delegated by the pharmacist,
Exactly.
duty.
And
But
they're
to Roger's
excluded in
point,
that
and-
section.
I don't want it to be confusing to the pharmacists out there who aren't on this call and
I
aren't
agree.
lawyers. They're like, but this person is a pharmacy technician. Should we make it, is there a way we can make it even more clear to the,
If
the
we had
average everyday?
licensed,
Yeah,
licensed pharmacy technician. That's
Or we
what
just put
Roger was
parentheses.
saying.
This does
Should
not
do-
include tech trainees.
I like that. Could we do not include technician trainees, just so people don't make a mistake in their interpretation?
Mhm.
Well, I think Roger was heading this way, and I agree that if it says licensed pharmacy technician, then it doesn't include trainees because they're registered.
But the concern
Totally
is
get it, Kristen.
But the
You are a super sophisticated board member. But I worry about the rank and file pharmacist who just moved here and says they're all technicians.
Right.
And if I just don't want a pharmacist to get in trouble because they inadvertently or without any sort of malintent misinterpreted what was meant here.
I totally agree with you,
Mhm.
Mark, and the nuance between registration and licensure is something that I don't think a lot of people would understand.
Yes.
But
Do
under
we
delegated duties, doesn't it say that you have to be a full pharmacy technician trained,
right, but
delegated to do?
if you're a pharmacist new to the state and you're looking up transfer requirements, can a prescription be faxed? Can a prescription be transferred by an intern? Like they're probably not going to go back to the delegation rule. We should be able to have it be clear enough that everybody understands
On
what
its
is
own.
what is the expectation. Should we have at a 3, a pharmacy technician trainee shall not participate in a transfer?
I think
I
that was
like
Roger's
that,
suggestion,
Lori.
either at the
Mhm.
end of that sentence or in a new sentence. Yeah.
Mhm.
I would prefer, I don't know if this makes any legal difference, so I would defer to like the lawyers on the call, but I would wonder if having it included in the language as opposed to like creating a new one saying they shall not. I worry about the instance in which a pharmacist like hands a piece of paper to a trainee and just says like put this in the fax machine. Like does that like if we create some new section saying that they shall not participate in this at all, would that bar that practice? I don't want pharmacists having to fax stuff. They should be helping patients.
I agree with that.
So where would we put that? I mean, we can either eliminate technician trainees altogether by maybe creating a number 5. This section does not apply to pharmacy tech trainees, or
I kind of like that sentence, just that like I think Roger and Mark had suggested at the end of where is it? Yeah, authorized licensed technician. This does not include like this does not apply to or this does not include a trainee, as opposed to like barring them from this whole section. I don't know if that makes a difference.
I think it does. I like it closer to the words because to Lori's point, this is one of the more frequent looked up rules, I would imagine, particularly for someone who is new to community pharmacy or new to the state. And putting it closer so they don't have to, I mean, I have associate attorneys who've been to law school who forget to keep reading, and they'll miss this. They're like, oh, I found my answer. Technicians are okay, and they'll stop reading. So I like it at the end of the sentence.
Kim, I think you missed the word not in that sentence. This does
Oh
not.
yeah.
Should we put the reference to the other part of delegated duties? Or now that we've spelled it out, we're good? We spelled it
Does
out?
the other delegated duties include transfers? If we reference it, does it also talk about transfers?
No, it just says what technicians cannot do.
Yeah,
Which
then
is
I
legal.
don't know that it's worth cross-referencing it if it doesn't provide any more clarity.
Okay, I agree. That makes sense.
Can you go back up to the top of this one again on the transfer rule? I just want to see where we talk about it can be transferred by orally, fax. Where am I seeing that?
right here.
Okay, when a store is closed, when we're transferring, how does that work?
I don't think it does, Roger.
Well,
Other
there's
than
plenty of
other than
stores that
electronic.
Yeah, I mean, well, the electronic works though. I mean, some of the chains can pull from the other ones to transfer. You have a 24-hour store that's receiving from a closed store. I mean, I think the default right now is they put the PICS name in, and I think that makes sense for patient care. But I just want to make sure we allow, if we're cleaning this up, let's make sure if people agree with that they should be able to do that.
I agree, Roger. I think that that's a critical point, and it is important for patient access.
Yeah, I think that would be really interesting. I think there's almost kind of like almost like an industry standard right now where that's what stores do to go ahead and help patients. They kind of like push or pull a transfer. And there's not necessarily another pharmacist on the other end, just like Lori said, but then obviously a pharmacist reviews the order and checks it.
That would really
Similarly,
only work if you had a shared database,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Right.
But if you have a shared database and you're just pulling the information from there, by getting rid of the word, by
it's probably
getting
not a
rid of the word,
transfer.
by getting rid of the word to, does that address it there? Where we struck to in number 1?
I think it kind of does, but I think there's also a similar situation, right, in which like a hub pharmacy will like push transfer a script to like a pharmacy on behalf of the patient, and they might not have that person's name. It's a pharmacy as opposed to a pharmacist.
What if we put in above that in little I, little Roman numeral I, the transfer of information is communicated electronically, verbally, by common database. Wait, common database is still going to rope in 2 pharmacists. Like, I think there should be an exception for if a common database is used, you really only need the receiving pharmacist, or, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But
I
then,
don't know if this is crazy, but I feel like a transfer within a common database is like not really a full transfer.
yep. So Mark, this is my concern. Let's say we go with your language. What if the pharmacist during the operational hours would just pull the data from the common database when the pharmacy is actually not closed? So I think I'm okay with your language, but we have to specifically state the fact that we would only allow that to happen if the other pharmacy is closed.
Well, the electronic transfer can happen anytime, right? So even
Right.
so,
If you're
open or
pulling
close,
it,
it's irrelevant
if you're
whether it's open or closed.
exactly, if you're 24-hour pharmacy, you want to be able to pull that transfer from the one that's not 24 hours.
Or a pharmacy that's closed on the weekend, that
Right.
something like that. I mean, the last thing we need to do is stop care for patients if there's somebody that's able to take care of them in hours that the pharmacy's open, as long as it can be, the information can be pulled in a safe way, which if you're using a shared database, like there is no manipulation of the data. Like, I don't know why we wouldn't want to allow it. I mean, that's just good for good patient care.
Yeah.
So I'm just throwing out ideas here, but if we're doing electronic, do we need the pharmacist names? That's the issue.
Yeah. I agree with you, Roger, because the common database is going to record the metadata that says, and you know, it's going to invalidate it at the transferring pharmacy. The metadata is all there. To your point, I think the pharmacist names and the interns' names and the technicians' names are only important when there's a dispute about the verbal transfers. You told me amoxicillin 500. No, I didn't. I said penicillin 500. Then you need to know who the people are. But if the computer has all the metadata, why do we need to know the people?
Even if it's a fax, right?
Same, yeah.
Even if it's a fax, the fax, you could,
The fax
you know,
stands on its own. This fax stands on its own. The data is the data. The
Right.
piece of paper is the
Exactly.
information.
So I think we only need the people's names when it's a verbal transfer.
So do we create a separate section here? Do we say that a prescription can be transferred electronically, verbally, or by fax between pharmacies, period? And then if it's a verbal transfer, these are the people that can do it. And this is the information that needs to be required. This is the individual's names need to be included.
I like that. That makes sense.
And that prevents phone calls too, right? So if somebody faxes you a transfer, if we don't really care who the pharmacist is on the other end, just like you don't necessarily care at a physician's office who threw a piece of paper in a fax machine, right, and faxed a prescription, it prevents a phone call, right? If the pharmacist didn't write their name on the transfer, today,
Right.
a pharmacist at the receiving store would have to call them and say, "Hi, this is Lori. I just got a fax transfer from you. Who's the pharmacist of record?" So that way it completes their record. That prevents phone calls between locations for information that I don't know that's really relevant.
I
Sandy,
agree.
is that ever relevant in an investigation? I'm just not sure I've ever heard that being an issue.
About who took the transfer?
Yeah, or who sent it? Yeah, I mean,
If you're using a shared electronic database or a
Right.
fax, is it relevant?
No.
Lori, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Yay. Does it still require us to record the full first and last name of the transferring pharmacist or intern, or does Arizona specify anymore?
The language doesn't state full name. It just says receiving and transferring pharmacist.
Thanks.
You will need the information on that, however, if it's a controlled substances. So would pharmacies actually have two different transfer systems for non-controlled versus controlled? I'm not sure that I see that actually happening.
All right, so
Andy's
what I'll do
right. We could-
is I'll work it
And we
into this area somewhere about electronic, carve out electronic, and then verbal and fax, try to carve that out to capture pharmacy information versus the individuals. So
And to Sandy's point, if you limited that to non-controlled, then you don't
Yeah.
have a conflict.
yeah, any A is for non-controlled
Yep.
substance.
There you go.
drugs.
Okay.
So I can just leave it under category A here. And that way it shouldn't be a problem. So I'll work something out in this section for electronic transfers versus verbal or fax.
I think fax should be included in that too, Kim. I
Yeah,
don't think
'cause
we
it's
need
like-
I don't think we need the pharmacist or technician's name if it was faxed.
Agreed. If the fax is wrong, you know it came from the other pharmacy. You go talk to them about why their fax is wrong.
But is when you generate that information to be faxed, isn't it filled out by the pharmacist or maybe initialed?
Well, here's
I-
the double top secret thing is the computer systems, even though it's 2023, usually just have one person's name in there, and it's usually the PIC, and the name on it is probably not right some of the time anyway.
I think the bigger point is, why would the sending pharmacy of a fax need to know who the receiving pharmacist is?
Yeah.
What are they
Agreed.
getting at?
Yeah,
Agreed.
it saves a phone call.
Do we need to specify something like computer system generated fax? Because a fax could be just a handwritten note of a transfer, right? And that we would want names for.
I'm
I don't
not
know, even the
opposed to-
handwritten note is okay, because the data's the data.
But that could potentially have people transferring fake prescriptions if, you know, I don't know.
They could be transferring fake prescriptions now. My favorite part has always been, how do you know it came from the doctor's office? Because it says Santan Family Medicine at the top. I could make any fax machine say Santan Family Medicine at the top. I mean, we got to use our professional judgment and our red flags anyway. And someday, the 1980s will call and want all of their fax machines back.
I mean, but Cindy, to your point, I'm not opposed to having the sending pharmacist have to have their name on it if you want. I just don't know why the sending pharmacist needs to gather the receiving pharmacist's name when they send a fax.
I'm just trying to prevent a lot of back and forth phone calls.
Right.
For the pharmacy teams for something that probably isn't really necessary. I think most pharmacy systems today, and maybe not in every independent, either has a system that pushes a fax using the electronic metadata, or they do some sort of a print of the prescription record and fax that. Again, printing the computer record that's there versus having a system that pushes it. But I understand what Tennille's saying too. Like, there would be nothing that would prohibit me from writing down that I'm transferring a prescription for blah, blah, blah to such and such, like it was a handwritten prescription.
So I still have the question on 7 and 8, and this discussion will also affect it. But if it's a verbal transfer, it would be a technician's name there. So if we want to use the language above about delegated pharmacy technicians.
Transferring individual or something.
Yeah, name of the authorized individuals named in this section or something like that. It was listed above.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if we were to include names, I think it would be most valuable to actually do the person performing. But like, I don't really see a whole lot of value in recording names aside from maybe on a verbal, like some others have said.
So instead of getting granulated here, 1 through 8, is there a way to say all information related to the permit holder, license holder, and prescription information provided by the prescriber? That's, traceable, obviously. It has to be all traceable. Instead of getting into the details, is there a generic way of saying it?
I'm going to pull up another couple states here.
What do we gain in that one, in the little 3 by the date of original dispensing? Number 4.
I think it just, then you have a 1-year expiration from the date it was written. So when you're transferring it.
But that's number 2, the date of issuance of the original prescription order. I'm just trying to figure out what 4 gets us, because 5 says you have the date of the last refill.
Yeah,
Yep.
no, I wouldn't.
That's,
Sandy,
it's 50-50.
You
So-
could potentially put that a pharmacy has to transfer all of the original prescription information as required per 32/1968, which sets out all of the components of a prescription. And then you would need basically refills remaining and date of last refill, perhaps.
But the date of original dispensing is not a requirement for the prescription because it's written, it's an order, it hasn't been dispensed yet. I'm just trying to figure out what we gain by 4. It's just one more data point. I'm just not sure why we need it.
So I just pulled up Idaho, which has obviously everybody knows the simplest rules, and maybe this is too basic, but their rule 405 is filling prescription orders transfers. A prescription drug order may be transferred within the limits of federal law. Drug outlets using a common database file are exempt from transfer limits, period. That is their rule on transfers. That's the only guidance they have.
Yeah, I support the general notion of like potentially exempting or handling common database stuff in the shared services section because I'm sure there's a ton of activities going on that we would not want to rock the boat on. I feel like there's a common understanding for shared databases that they may not apply to this section.
So this 405 would be applicable to controlled substances, Lori? Do they? how
They
do
don't
address
they don't address controls in that requirement.
Or
I don't know if
federal
federal-
includes controlled.
It's federal.
It would be within the federal laws what it says. That would be the way that they address it.
Yeah, but I don't know if they would address non-control, non-control federal law.
Right.
So
And like I said, that might be too far to go, but like, should we look at removing some of the specificity and moving to more of a standard of care type discussion here? So that we don't prevent technology that maybe doesn't exist today from being able to assist with us if it can be done safely.
I think partly because technicians allowing technicians to do this is so new to our state, it needs to be kind of explicit that it is allowed. I think there's a lot of confusion, so we might need to spell it out.
I think with regards to the amount of information that needs to be transferred, I think basically, maybe I'm wrong here, but like every single PMS, whether it is developed by a large entity or it is available for sale to other pharmacies like across the US, they're all going to have the prescription components, like a general list of prescription components that are required. So I don't think it's like that is the requirement to fill a prescription in reality, right? Like you have to get it into your system and print a label.
Here's Washington. I kind of like where they go with this. Prescription transfers. Subsections 2 through 5 of the section apply to the transfer of prescription information for non-controlled drugs. The transfer of controlled substance prescription information must conform with the requirements of 21 CFR section 1306.25. Upon patient request, a pharmacy may transfer, a prescription may be transferred within the limits of state and federal law. Sufficient information needs to be exchanged in the transfer of the prescription to maintain an auditable trail and all elements of a valid prescription. Pharmacies sharing a secure real-time database are not required to transfer prescription information for dispensing. Prescriptions must be transferred by electronic means or facsimile except in emergent situations.
I'm cool with all of that. I think that sounds really good. The only thing was the last sentence about the emergent situation. Since there's like still not widespread
I
adoption
agree.
of the transfer standard, I would want to scratch that and add verbals too.
I agree. I would get rid of the last part of it, and maybe we add for verbal prescriptions, the identity of the transferring individual needs to be documented. The person completing and receiving the transfer needs to be documented. I don't know. I'm just trying to not reinvent the wheel here.
I like it.
Yeah, I'm in more line with Washington than, was it Washington or Oregon?
Washington.
That was Washington.
And Idaho is very,
This has a little bit more specificity at address that you have to have an audit trail, right? You have to have all the elements of the prescription, that it needs to be transferred within the limits of state and federal law. So obviously you can't transfer more drug than what is allowed by the prescriber.
correct.
I don't know.
Yep. And that addresses a concern that I had in like the next one of the next bullet points too. Not was a little bit further up, was around like voiding the prescription. I think it would, like, in the spirit of saving phone calls, there's so many instances in which a patient is just like, oh, I'm out of town for 2 days and I forgot my meds. That's like 4 phone calls for transfers, when a pharmacist should just be able to be like, oh, hey, I'm just going to delete 4 tablets off this prescription and give it to you and record it, as opposed to having to move prescription back and forth. There's like huge error risk there.
Here, Cam, I'll email you this language in case we
Yeah.
want to put it up on the screen for people to react to here.
Please.
Hey, while we're doing that, let me throw out one other concept that comes up. Right now, you have to transfer the entire script. Thoughts on transferring just a single fill at a time as the patient requires? Or it's up to the patient if they want just a single fill or the whole script transferred?
Yep, that's exactly what I was getting at, Roger.
I don't know about other pharmacy systems, but I'm not sure all of them would have the ability to accept anything other than a transfer of a whole prescription. But Lori or anyone else that works at a chain, do you guys have the ability to transfer just a couple tablets and not deactivate the prescription?
No.
But
Or you
that's
can't
a
just delete it out.
But that's a computer programming issue that if the law starts to do that, people will develop it.
It's true.
But now you have one prescription that may be active in 2 locations, whether it's only 1 fill or whatever. I know the total quantity doesn't get impacted, but you have 2 active prescriptions potentially at 2 different locations.
It happens all the time though, right? Like a prescriber will send prescriptions to 2 different places, retail for the first pickup and mail order for the next one, or
Yeah, but
they're on vacation, so they send it out.
But now you have a prescriber that wrote 2. We have a prescriber that wrote 1 prescription, potentially active in 2 locations.
Well, it wouldn't be active in the second location. If it's only a single fill, it'd be filled and then there's no refills.
And part of the issue too is like we already have to do this in New York. So if anybody goes to New York, you can only give them 1 fill at a time. So it's like already happening. I think the Washington like language would address this if
Let me
if we
pull it
went
up
forward
so we
with it.
can get a visual. Lori, you already sent it to me.
I did.
All right.
Kim, you're concerned with the 2 prescriptions alive at the same time, is that the patient's going to get double the amount or there's going to be some overdose?
No, I think just record keeping is the concern. Are you able to see this?
Yeah.
like Emily mentioned, I don't know that I think I don't agree with 5 on here. But otherwise, I think that this is a pretty good model. We could add something to it, as I mentioned, around if it's a verbal transfer that you need to have the identity of both parties on either end.
Okay. Why don't I take this Washington language, Lori, and then of course modify number 5 as well. And work it into,
How does that, I mean, Emily and I both weighed in, but how does anybody else feel about this?
I like it.
Lori, this is Mark. I like it a lot, except for number 5, which you don't like either.
Great.
If we are going to do this one, and I'm not opposed to it, on number 4, it says it's not a transfer. So what is it? Because we have a law that you have to have like sequential prescription numbers from it. How are we numbering this when it's being filled at different stores or?
I think in like practice, what would happen is the prescription number would assume the prescription would assume a new number at the new store, and the number that it was previously attributed to it would go to the screen that said like this prescription was transferred at the original store, like it's an invalid or whatever.
Or we could look at that law that requires sequential prescription numbers because I know that it causes problems in some instances.
some folks
okay
have,
too.
yeah, they requested to track by dates now too, right? So the sequential numbering is a moot point.
Yeah, and
And
there have
if
been
it's
systems for years that don't use sequential numbers. PDX used a number for controlled substances, a different sequence for C3s, 4s, and 5s, and then a different number for non-controlled substances. And if you have a compounding software that doesn't hang up, yeah, I think sequential numbers are moot. And I think we don't need them anymore because they're super easy to retrieve in a computer database. Back in the day when we just had real Bates stampers like my dad used, sequential numbers were important because that was the only way you could track them.
So just finishing on 4, a patient's going to have 2 prescriptions at their home theoretically that are the exact same drug, that are the exact same prescription, refill 2 and refill 3, with different numbers on them? If they came from different stores?
That's how it happens now.
Yep.
You know, I'm just trying to understand, if it's not a transfer, what is it?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I think what Washington, this is Washington, right? I think what they intended was that it doesn't require all of the information that we generally require for a transfer. And they were pretty liberal with the language. I think we could say pharmacies sharing a secure real-time database are not required to comply with, and then things like names of personnel involved. Like we could list the exceptions to the documentation that we want to put in for the real-time database, but we could still call it a transfer because I don't know what other word I'd give it, Roger. That's a good point.
I agree.
But there aren't any other requirements for Washington. All the requirements are here.
I think they were trying to get at and that's the reason why I like this, is I think they were trying to get at what we were talking about, is the people don't necessarily matter on either end if you're using a common database, but they worded it kind of funny. But I think that that was the intent here. So maybe 4 needs a little bit of wordsmithing and 5 needs to go.
I really enjoy 4 as it stands, just because I really don't want to get into, like, some states will call this shared filling. Like, some of these stores will have shared services agreements, some of them will not. I want to be really careful about, like, not excluding practices, because I know, like, certain large entities will do a transfer in certain states because that will allow them to move prescriptions around at the patient's will, when that state may not allow shared services or something to that extent. I think we should keep this as broad as possible.
Oh,
Not
you're right. Like for central fill.
exactly. That's what I'm worried about, is excluding practices like this, or getting into adding additional requirements that we're not privy to by calling all of these movements transfers.
But what if we just wordsmith it, Emily, a little bit? So pharmacies using a sharing a secure real-time database are not required to document the identity of the persons completing the transfer, or something to that effect, because we still have the shared services rules that would allow for those other activities. But to the other's point, it's not addressing that these aren't quote unquote transfers. Because I don't consider central filling a transfer.
Exactly. But some pharmacies have to transfer in order to do that type of thing because of their states. So if it's a multi-state entity, like, that's what I'm worried about. I don't have direct experience with this, but I know that there are large systems that do such things to comply with state law.
When in the systems are going to have to be sophisticated enough to know, even though it's the same script, the inventory is coming from 2 different places.
Exactly.
Right. And the billing, presumably.
Exactly.
The simplifying concept I love. It's just the the nuance. Okay.
If we got rid of 4 altogether and added a new 4 that said for verbal transfers, you have to identify the people. Does that accomplish what we're trying to address? And do we need to be explicit that transfers can be completed via facsimile, electronic, and verbal? Because I know that that's a question when it's not stated in a lot of other states. If it's silent, does that mean you can't do it?
This one says within the limits, the only state limit, I mean, federal we're dealing with for controls, I understand. But the only state limits here is you have to give an auditable trail.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm reading this correctly, I can do single fill transfers. I can have tech trainees transfer. I'm not sure I can't have janitors transfer.
Yeah, but they may have those responsibilities identified in different areas of their laws.
That may be it can.
So,
but the only state limit is it has to be an auditable trail as I read this section.
well, when we look at prescription requirements and what's required on a prescription, that's already covered. So if you're transferring it, you still need to meet the requirements of a prescription, right? So that part is covered under prescription requirements. Now is just a matter of identifying individuals. And I think we are on the right track of electronic and fax. It's coming from pharmacy A going to pharmacy B. That's traceable, trackable. Pharmacy A already has captured who initially filled that prescription, so if it was filled wrong to begin with, obviously it's,
Yeah.
bad data being transferred, so you just go back to the original filling pharmacist. And then we already know who's filling the pharmacy, prescription at pharmacy B, right? Because they have captured that information. So a lot of this data that we're talking about today is already in other sections of our law book when filling a prescription. So do we really need to address that component? Sandy, your thoughts on that?
I do agree that we've got the requirements of a prescription, both in statute 1968 and in other sections of, rule, earlier portion of 407.
I mean, if we reference that area for transfers, all data required shall contain information from ARS or R423, whatever it is, and that's, I think we can reference it and that's it, if we need to. But again, it goes back to electronic and fax. We capture the pharmacy information, but not the individuals. But we can backtrack it and figure out who did what.
I'm supportive of keeping this super simple and just being like what's valid, like what's required for dispensing. The only concerns that I have with potentially like referencing the prescription requirements section is like for a written prescription, wouldn't it maybe require like the prescriber's signature, or for like a verbal prescription, would it require like the agent's name? Like we're not putting that stuff on transfers right now. There's no way to do that.
No. But you did capture the physician prescriber signature at the originating pharmacy. And again, it goes
Yes,
back to the
yes.
auditable, auditable language in the Washington place.
That sounds good.
I think Kristen does have a good point about identifying, because there's mud in the water about who's allowed to do what as far as tech trainees go and stuff. So maybe I can somehow eliminate a lot of sections in our transfer language. I mean, for instance, number 3 here, number 2 here. So we can redline quite a bit of it and merge what Washington has into our section, make it a little more clear, but not to stretch it out like we have it stretched out.
I agree with that approach. I do think the more I think about it, that we need to explicitly say that it can be done verbally, electronically, or by fax too. So that way there's not a ton of questions about how can it occur? It doesn't say, like, electronically can mean a lot of different things too.
Correct.
But I think it's valid. So that way that it doesn't also open up companies like for like third party audits and that kind of stuff either.
Agreed.
That's a good point.
Okay, so I'll take that back and work on that one. All right, now speaking of controlled substances. So we have 2 parts, and I do kind of like Idaho's generic version of this because it does apply to controlled substances. Doesn't necessarily apply to non-controlled. I think that's the only hiccup I had with Idaho's language, that doesn't address non-controls. But very generically, it says you must follow the federal law. We can cite the federal law as to 21 CFR 1306.25, as well as 21 CFR 1306, which talks about initial transfer or forwarding of an initial prescription. Idaho doesn't reference which federal law So I don't, there's a gap.
Washington had 21 CFR 1306.25.
25, but now we're talking about 21 CFR 1306, which allows for the initial prescription to be transferred.
Cam,
No,
it's
that-
actually 1306.08 for the.
Zero.
Okay.
So again, we can probably, and as you can see, I did redline quite a bit of it. Because it's already outlined here, there's no real reason to stress what was already mentioned in.
Could we modify the Washington language to include both sections of 21 CFR 1306? So 25 and what did you say it was? 06? Sandy?
0.08 or something.
Or 08?
0.08, yes.
Is that the new one, Sandy, for initial? Is it 08?
Yes, yes, it is. It's section F of 0.08.
Yeah, I'll have to look at that one up.
Sorry, Kim, it's 1306.08.
06.08.
Yes.
So,
Are we
Lori,
gonna-
your suggestion is try to work it into just this so we don't have a separate section.
Sorry, into the reference in number 1,
Mm-hmm.
where it has to conform with the CFR requirements. Like, can we just cite both there?
I think so.
And if applicable, 21 CFR section 1306.08. Sandy, how do you feel about that?
I think that should work. They're both cited. You have both your refill portion and the initial electronic original ones.
Do we have to put the published dates or? Or can we just cite that? And then, of course, when GERC and Secretary of State adopt it, they do stamp it on the appropriate date.
Yeah, I wouldn't put the published date, but I would, in looking at number 2, though, I would add or caregiver, other than just patient request for a transfer.
Good suggestion.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Anything else on this? All right, so just my takeaway is I will take Washington's language with our slight modifications. Try to work it into some of our language so we don't get too granular, but we don't get too generic either. And redline a lot of it. Fair
Sounds
statement?
good.
Hey, Kim, before you move off of prescription transfers, I think the reason we're talking about it is we had a policy on it. So assuming we get this cleaned up, we would then eliminate the policy statement on original transfer of original scripts.
Yes.
Okay, just don't want to forget that.
You mentioned it earlier, but keeping in that blue section there, if delegated to technicians.
Yeah, but we do have a substantive policy on transferring non-control original without it being filled first, and we would eliminate that substantive policy.
Yep.
All right. Where shall we move to next, guys?
Definitions.
Got a lot that is not on the agenda.
Oh, the definitions weren't on the agenda.
So the
Uh,
definitions are necessary to do compounding because lots of R423, 410 references words that need to be updated in the definitions.
Yeah, I'm good with that, Mark, with the USP standards, but we don't have technicians agendized. I don't think we can. Well, I guess
I'm
we've got
sorry.
we've got other rules, I guess, technically, so we can talk about anything. But specifically, we have USP current standards, opioid antagonists, and drug chain supply chain securities act. I think USP is somewhat time sensitive. I think opioid antagonists is time sensitive, and DSCSA probably not as much so.
I get it. I thought you said definitions. You
I
were
did.
saying technician.
No, I said.
Oh, you did. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
All right.
That's fine.
Should we get into the USP component?
We can triage.
I'm
Sure.
open to going wherever you would like to next, Kim. Probably that makes the most sense to me, but we've got 45 minutes left just as a time check.
All right, here we go. You guys can see my screen?
Yes.
Well, actually, before we do this, I think it's actually more helpful to start with definitions.
That makes
But-
sense, Mark. And thank you for doing your homework and providing this.
You're welcome.
Very helpful.
And I'll preface the things that I would assume, Madam Chair, you'd like me to lead the discussion on the red line since I proposed them.
Please, that would be
And-
fabulous.
And I'll preference my remarks this way. And for those of you who were at the last board meeting, saw the last board meeting, this is in the context of the state of Arizona has exclusive jurisdiction over the practice of pharmacy. The FDA has no jurisdiction over the practice of pharmacy. And I'll say it that way, and then reasonable people can disagree with me. But we'll start with definitions. So beyond use date is a component that only exists in the compounding world. Beyond use date is the expiration date we put on finished compounds. Expiration dates are things that manufacturers do. And so if you'll notice in the section on beyond use date, I recommended that we strike R423 410 subsection J1D. And we'll get there. You don't have to really comment it on it yet because we'll get there. But all of this is the same. Really, beyond use date is described in R423 410 B3D, and in a slightly different context in I6E, but J1D can be stricken, and we can come back to that later. But that's the recommendation I made there to make it conforming to what we're going to do in 410. I highlighted this thing, biological safety cabinet, and I'll also describe a little bit about what R411 hold on just a second, where is it? It is R1-1 414, which is what we need to do as a citizen of Arizona when we're writing rules, when we incorporate materials by reference. And that is when you say, gosh, we want to incorporate USP Chapter 795. We want to incorporate, in this case, what NIST or the National Sanitation Foundation describes as a biological safety cabinet. When we wrote this definition, we did it right. We referenced a specific organization, a specific publication, a specific date. There is a requirement in R11414 that we add the sentence "and no future amendments or additions." And so I call attention to this mostly because, the compounding pharmacists on the team may be concerned that we're still using the definition of biological safety cabinet from the June 1987 edition. And I would recommend we consider updating that to the newer definitions. They're slightly different. And we can do that as we decide on what we want to do in 410. And so if we want to scroll down a little bit.
Mark, one question.
Yes.
And I don't know
Yep.
if this is for you or for Cam. Do we need to go back to the underlying statute? And obviously we can't change that today on this meeting, but that's where I think still part of this conflict lies. Like, I feel like
There-
all of us on this call are committed that we want to try and move outside of potentially adopting 795, 800, 787 in its entirety and kind of piecemeal a little bit, but I still get stuck on the statute.
Well, what concerns you? See, we talked about this at the board meeting a little bit. What specifically concerns you about the statute?
Let me pull it up.
The federal statute describes using USP only in the context of selecting an active ingredient, but not in the context of compounding. So the federal statute, I would argue, but reasonable attorneys who have also been to law school argue differently, and I get that. But what the statute generally does is it says, look, compounding is within your scope of practice. Board of Pharmacy, write rules if you wish on compounding.
Yeah, Lori, I agree. If we could pull up the statute and look at the exact
For
language.
some reason, having a hard time pulling up the law, but Cam, can you do that, please?
Yep.
Thank you. I don't know why my computer's not letting me pull it up. Not to sidetrack your presentation here, Mark. I just want to foundationally kind of ground this so that we don't go back and forth here.
Understood.
And we're going to the definition of official compendium, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yep. And I would argue that based upon Arizona law, the legislature got that wrong. They're not allowed to do that. The improper delegation.
But in Title 41, Mark, it references rules. It doesn't reference statute. So in rules, when we cite the latest version, you have to incorporate it by date and all that good stuff.
Fair enough. So
It doesn't.
You could do that, and we should consider doing that here. So if you wanted to incorporate the November 1st, 2023 edition, which I don't think you should as a person who's compounded for more than almost 30 years, you'd have to run it through rulemaking. You could not do it in a board meeting. And so we could do that on this call if you wanted. I don't think it's a good idea. This is why I'm referencing the 2020 version in this meeting, but we can have a reasonable debate about whether you use 2020 or 2023. We should also consider in your board bill updating 64.
Is there anywhere else in statute that this is discussed? Or is this the only reference?
So it's defined under drug as well, established name. There's 10 different sections in the statute that official compendium is referenced.
Like as it relates to compounding specifically, the practices of compounding, I guess, and not just drug.
No, but let me check the rules and see how many times it's referenced there.
I just don't want to get to the point where we do all this work with rules and then get shot down by GERC because they reference the statute that isn't necessarily what we all want anyway. So just trying to figure out like how do
Where
we
does it say that we have to comply with official compendium though? I mean, just because it's defined, where does it say that pharmacies compounding?
That's valid too, Kelly.
Yeah, it's just a definition.
Yeah, it's interesting. The federal act doesn't even reference the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. The definition of federal act means federal laws and regulations that pertain to drugs, devices, poisons, and hazardous substances that are official at the time any drug, device, poison, hazardous substance is affected by this chapter. So that's also just a definition. Doesn't require compliance with the federal act unless the rules require it. And then that always makes me nervous. What federal act are you talking about? We all presume that that's the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. The legislature should have been more clear.
That's fair.
Definition of act earlier, I thought there was actually. Maybe I'm not.
What is it, Roger?
Earlier in the definition.
Definition of act.
I don't see a specific definition for the word act in 1901. Just federal act.
And I guess just to go back to your further point about the board regulates the practice of pharmacy, that's where I think we run into, and Cam, please direct me if I'm wrong here, and if I shouldn't be talking about this because it's a board matter, also jump in. But I think that that's where some of this conflicts, right? So the FDA has jurisdiction over drugs. So when we start to talk about shared processing and some of those kinds of things and the requirements for what is required from a labeling standpoint, I think that that's where we get stuck. Cam, please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, practice of pharmacy, absolutely. The FDA doesn't regulate that. We do that, but once the product is complete, and you're talking about a compounded drug now at this point, and the distribution of a compounded drug would fall under the FDA's jurisdiction.
Cam, did you say it would?
It would, yes.
Thank you.
Is Mark speaking to us? I can't hear anything.
Oh,
Okay.
I would to that point, the FDA only has jurisdiction when the drugs get into interstate commerce. So if the pharmacy only has an Arizona license and the drugs never leave the state, the FDA has limited jurisdiction over that finished compound. They have jurisdiction over the components of that compound that presumably were received from a company that does engage in interstate commerce. But I would argue a pharmacy that operates exclusively within Arizona, the finished compound doesn't have much. That's the Arizona Board of Pharmacy's issue.
What about like the insanitary conditions guidance? Wouldn't that authorize the FDA to inspect a pharmacy even if it's not engaged in interstate sales?
Super interesting case that's being litigated in Connecticut right now. Yep, it's a good question, and one that there's a case, SCA versus the FDA right now, that's arguing that very point. What does that mean? And does the FDA have proper jurisdiction over against FCA? And FCA argues no. You've exceeded your authority. But that's not a settled case at all. That's still in the system, still in court. The bottom line is, though, and Lori, I appreciate you level setting and getting back, and I think this is an important step. The question as to whether or not, regardless of what this board decides, if this committee recommends to the full board the November 1, 2023 chapters ought to be enforced and ought to be enforced immediately, it needs to go through rulemaking, which is why we're having this exercise. And during rulemaking, there will be public comment periods and opportunities both for the public to comment on the pros and cons of this new rule that would be proposed. And then there's another opportunity for public comment at GERC, and then another opportunity for people to go to court and challenge it. And so there are more opportunities. But regardless, I would argue it has to go through rulemaking, whatever's decided.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's well pointed. I just want to make sure that as we're going through the changes, the potential changes to the rule, that we're keeping in mind the statute, so that way we don't go through the work of trying to open up rulemaking and all those kinds of things and then get stuck in the process because we have a limitation in the statute. And if the statute needs to change, then obviously now is the time for us to have those discussions to look at trying to do that for next session. And the last thing that I want to do is put a pharmacy in a bad place with the FDA. We all see a ton of stuff with the FDA anyway. I just want to make sure that we're thinking about this in its entirety and that we're not looking at just the rules and not contemplating if there is something statutorily that is prohibiting us from getting there. And I don't want to get into and re-litigate redeliberate on the matters that happened at the last meeting, because I don't think that that's appropriate. I want to make sure that we're being mindful of time and effort and all those kinds of things. And if there are other changes that need to happen before we can fully have these conversations, then let's consider that. And then we can, like, if that's a board issue, if that's an AZPA issue, however that is. I don't know that any of us, I just want to be mindful that we're not going to run afoul of the rulemaking process later in the process here.
Well, I think that's a good point, and there's limited time left on this call, and I think it is relevant to the agenda item because of the math that you kind of did on it right now. There are at least two places in the statute, 1901, that talk about compendium and federal act. And do we want to make sure that changes don't need to be suggested to the legislature, because there will be a vehicle. The board, I understand, is running at least one bill, and there will be a vehicle to make those changes if this committee recommends it, and then the full board says, yeah, that's a good idea, we should try to get it into our bill. Because they're completely related to rulemaking, and to your point.
The statute doesn't require pharmacies to comply with USP in all future revisions. It just defines it, right?
That's how I
I believe
read
it does.
too.
You're right. It's just a definition. But when that definition is used in a rule, then you might get sideways.
Well, it seems cleanest then if we want to do something different than accept the revisions from November 1st, that we would change the statute so there's no confusion.
You could do that, or you could just be careful about the use of the word official compendium in the rules. Meaning, be specific as to the compendium you're talking about in the rules. Because the statute doesn't require that you use the official compendium.
So is your point, Mark? So if we were to reference, like, so if we went back to the beyond use state, like, not saying that this is what we want, but if we say the definition of beyond use state according to the USP compendium published on yada 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 date. If we were to say that in the rule, that that's the level of specificity, if we say the compendium, that we would need to have a date.
Yes, and that's sort of where I was going with and I wasn't very eloquent with it. I think you can reference different publications for different things. So the pharmacy community that went to USP in 2020 to appeal this chapter, these 3 chapters. You've got a problem with these 3 chapters, and that appeal, it happened in January 2020, delayed implementation because there were new revisions that were written in 2022. And the new revisions that were written in 2022 would have been appealed, except for there just wasn't funding to hire a Quinn Emanuel and a Bozen and Snow to travel to Washington, D.C. again and appeal it. But the most offensive parts of 9.5, 9 and 9.7, and parts of 800 have to do with beyond use state. Beyond use state is just not safe and not appropriate in the new chapters, and it's too rigorous. So for example, if this committee wanted to recommend that beyond use state rely on the 2020 publication, and other parts of the good compounding practice rely on the 2023 application, you could do that because the rule requires you to reference the specific publication date anyway. And we have in 410, if we have time to get there today, has a section on beyond use date. You could choose to reference the good beyond use date definition that we've relied on since the beginning of time, that has not caused harm and done us very well. And for the more stringent things that we all agree are good best practices in the compounding community, we could reference the 2023 version.
Mark, what if we, instead of being that granular, just said or, like the pharmacy could follow either version of USP 797?
This committee could decide that and recommend that, sure.
Because there's pharmacies that are licensed in multiple states that would be required to follow the new version if they were going to ship out of state. And then there's pharmacies that don't, that would maybe prefer to follow the older version. And the older version was never shown to be problematic as long as it was followed. So I don't see why a pharmacy wouldn't be able to follow either or.
That's an excellent point, Neil.
I like that. And that's not all that different than what we've been doing with California for a really long time anyway. California has always had strange and more restrictive rules, and pharmacies compound differently for patients in California, and frankly, most of the time don't ship certain things to California because California just doesn't allow it. But there's a lot of things we don't do because another state is more restrictive. If we have, if we're mailing things, we're putting temperature sensors and things that are going to Wyoming, for example, but we don't have to do that in other states. So to your point, yes, that's something that pharmacies could make work.
Okay, Cam, do we want to go back to definitions? Or Mark's proposed definitions, I
Yep,
guess.
I will move
Thank you.
to that right now.
And Madam Chair, because of the limitation on time, I wonder if a useful thing would be just to run through and describe, and I'm an N of one, I'm just one person that had some ideas, and describe the red lines and describe, here's the rationale, here's the thinking, and then give some people some time to deliberate that in their own head and come back to this if we don't run out of time, and have better or different suggestions, but at least run through, the various sections and describe the rationale. So for example here, biological safety cabinet, those people who are involved, the hospital pharmacists, Tennille, other people who compound may want to look at June 1987 versus the more recent one and decide if we really need to change this, which is why I highlighted it. I don't know that it really needs to be changed, but people may want to do some homework and research that before we come back.
I think it absolutely needs to be changed.
Well, there you go.
Well, because high risk, low to moderate risk agents, is that talking about the drug or the compounding?
This is just the definition of biological safety cabinet.
What is the
Yeah.
current date, Mark, on that one? Do you know?
I'm sorry, what's the more current date?
What is the most revised version? What date is that?
I think I saw 2022 on mine.
I think Kristen's right. I think it's as recent as last year.
Do we have to cite the month or just a year?
Well, it's the edition. So you have to describe it in a way that someone could go to the library or the internet and find the specific edition. So I can take that homework and go back and find the more recent edition, and then provide the committee with, I could do a side by side. This is what 1987 thought a class 2, what a biosafety cabinet was, and this is the difference between the two. And this is another problem, as Tennille pointed out. The National Sanitation Foundation doesn't talk to the USP, and so they're gonna use different words like low and moderate risk. But we can do that. So we scroll down. This was super interesting. It used to say this is a receptacle, and a receptacle in this context is the container that we put the drugs in for compounding. And it just described a receptacle as described in the official compendium that is used in the manufacturing or compounding a drug or in distributing or supplying or dispensing the finished dosage form. Here's one, and I used the 2020 version. Here's one where we could use the 2023 version if we wanted to. I don't have any objections to how they describe containers, packaging and drug containers in 2023. Tennille?
The only thought I might have is the requirements they have for the validation of that container.
Oh, you're right. The
Like
very
container-
expensive validation. Yeah.
Like container closure integrity studies that may or may not be necessary in all cases.
That's right, because so one of the things I'm trying to preserve are the low risk compounds, like the things we all agree and we used to talk about all the time. The butt bombs and the magic mouthwashes and flavoring, when we flavor suspensions for children. We wouldn't want all of the pharmacies to have container integrity closure systems for those really, really low risk things. Where they're important, certainly are more important is in the sterile compounds. But even under the old chapters, the package and drug preparation containers served us well. So anyway, that's some context there.
So do you
We
use
can
the
go back and forth
or?
on-
So do you use the or there?
We could use the or. I like using the or there.
So
That would be an
2020 or
option.
or 2023?
I think that's an option that could be considered, certainly.
Should we put something like the pharmacist's discretion or professional judgment as to which they would use?
Based on-
I like that, particularly for low risk compounds as is defined in 2020.
Just curiosity, how would a pharmacist base their professional judgment on that one?
I'll tell you why.
No,
For a
how do they do it?
well, for a compounded suspension, I'm going to take the lid off. I'm going to add the amount of diluent, the amount of water that it wants me to put in the antibiotic, and then I'm going to add the appropriate number of drops of whatever flavoring the recipe says. And I'm going to put the lid back on that container, and I'm going to rely on the fact that the manufacturer did a good job with the container, and it's only going to be used for 14 days, and not having to repackage that into something I've already done a study on is a reasonable thing that I'm going to say in court and in my deposition, my 6 years of pharmacy school and my 28 years of practice, I'm comfortable saying that the manufacturer container that I use to compound in doesn't need to change. I'm just going to put the lid back on. And no, Your Honor, no jury, I didn't call the manufacturer and ask them when I add flavoring to it, is it still okay? Because they would have said, we don't have any data on it. And so that would be an example of using my professional judgment.
Or for sterile compounding, if you've got proprietary vial and stopper systems that come with validation from the manufacturer, should you really need to do a container closure integrity study in-house for products, especially that are being dispensed, say, for immediate administration, not long-term storage, not frozen storage, those kind of things?
Exactly. It's an expert opinion based upon the short duration of the beyond use date, based upon the integrity studies that the manufacturer has performed and is publishing and is relying on. Those are things that I can reasonably rely on based upon the risks that come from my training and experience. So
could someone challenge, obviously professional judgment, it can vary from person to person, right? So if there was ever a complaint filed with the board, does it become the battle of the experts?
It certainly does, and we've been there before in other complaints. And this usually happens in compounding. When there are compounding complaints, it's usually experts on both sides. Actually, it's usually one side, it's usually the defense side, that hires the expert to say, this is why we agree or disagree with what this pharmacist did. Yeah, so you're right. When it comes to professional judgment, that's what it is. But that's what being a professional is. We wouldn't be professionals if everything was prescribed and we just checked boxes. You wouldn't need to go to school. We would write rules that described every single circumstance you could come up with, and this is what you're going to do. And that's just not possible in healthcare, particularly in pharmacy. And so there are times when you have to rely on the professional judgment of the pharmacist, because here is a situation no one anticipated or has been in practice for 200 years, and there haven't been any even anecdotal evidence that the practice is harmful, and I'm going to rely on that.
Which I think we're trying to get rid of the volume of bright line regulations. When we go back to the original intent of this committee, it was to allow for innovation and practice and to modernize what exists today. So I would like to try and get rid of as much bright line pieces as we can, but still ensuring patient safety.
I agree.
But to your point, Mark, I mean, we have to allow, like, there's no way that we can contemplate every what if situation. Otherwise, our rule book is going to be 9 million pages long. Like that is just not fundamentally, to me, a way that we can or should regulate as a state.
Well, and even if it were 900 pages long, it's not going to anticipate everything. And so the pharmacist is going to be forced to not take care of the patient in front of them. And I think, and this is off agenda, but I think that's where we are with controlled substances right now. We're so scared of dispensing them that we're just telling people we've never met, I don't have any in stock. And I mean, not we on this call, but that happens every day, and it's just too much. Because when you get too prescriptive, you end up not being able to take care of the patient. So I like the or here, and I like the using a professionally reasonable judgment of the pharmacist. I like all those suggestions.
Pam, I have a quick question for you on citing the USP official as of May of 2020. Can we cite that with GERC in that manner, since when you pull it up, that's not the official version?
I checked it, Sandy, and if it's not right, let me know. But when I pull the predecessor to the November 1, USP tells me to cite it as May 1, 2020. But if it's older than that, then we need to change it.
Mark, I think it's older than that. The May 1, 2020.
No, I get it. It is older than that. But when you go to the instructions that USP gives you about citations, they have official as of May 1, 2020. And I think that's because of their bylaws that require them periodically to I don't know, to reaffirm that this is the official one, even though it's older and they didn't make any changes. But it's a good technical point that Sandy brings up. These are definitely older than 2020. But what does USP want it cited as? So we could go back to USP. Maybe their lawyers are the ones to ask the questions. How do you properly cite the predecessor to 95? Because on your website, it says published date and then official as of, and the most official as of date is May 1, 2020. We could say published date. That might be more clear. Keep going if you want. Just provide more context. Here's where current good compounding practices. I just referenced the section of the rule where it lives. I don't know if that's proper or not, but something to think about. Make it super clear. Hey, pharmacist, if you're reading the definitions, this is where you go to find out what that means. Good manufacturing practice. Good manufacturing practice is found first in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and then in its CFRs. I didn't add that, but I thought that was more clear.
Mark Artiniel question there. I'm not the degree of an expert that either of you is. Current good compounding practices, does that apply to any of the 503 category pharmacies or only current good manufacturing practices? I just want to make sure that we're not saying that a pharmacy that holds one of those FDA registrations doesn't have to apply with the FDA requirements. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, there are no FDA requirements on compounding. There are only FDA requirements on the active pharmaceutical ingredients that you can use in compounding and anticipatory compounding, and to some extent labeling. But current compounding practices isn't a federal thing at all. That's
Okay.
Mark, I think Lori's referring to 503Bs.
Right.
Yeah. CGMP is required by 503Bs, but that's
Yeah.
current good manufacturing practices, not good compounding
Okay,
practices.
that was my question. CGMP is the
Okay.
only thing that they would need to comply with. Okay, and we've got the FDA cited there.
Well, that's why
Okay.
I thought it was more proper to cite that. To your, I didn't know where you were on that.
My
Yeah.
question probably was unclear. Like I said, I'm not the expert of either one of you. I just don't want to create some
No.
sort of conflict for licensees.
No, and so that's the point. Section 503B is in the FDCA. Yeah. So we can scroll down. I can talk a little bit more. Digital signature. I just updated the ARS. I went to go look at 41132E, and it's been renumbered twice. And so I just changed the number to make it the right statute. And digital signatures found in 410, which is why I looked at it.
In 1 second, can we go back to dispensing pharmacists just for a second? I just want to take a look at that.
Which one did you want? Dispensing pharmacy?
Dispensing pharmacists.
Okay.
Does this indicate that a pharmacist must manually initial a prescription?
That's how I'm reading it. And we've been trying to get rid of that on the other labeling requirements as we've been moving through, like that an electronic record would be sufficient.
So what the reason why I went to digital signature is in sections of 410 where it talks about manual initials, I tried to make that manual or digital, giving the pharmacy the choice. And then I wanted to make sure that the right statute referenced what a digital signature is. So if you wanted to say and initials here, we could go back to 402 and make sure it says manual or digital.
Yeah, but on a label, I don't think it's necessarily required on a label. I think that's what our discussion was. As long as we captured it in the computer system, I think we were okay.
Agreed that that's how we enforce it now. We just might want to check, does 402 still have the word manual there?
I think we got rid of it in the earlier draft.
Okay, all right.
I just saw initials and it caught my eye as Cam was scrolling. So I just want to make sure that that matches, because I don't want there to have to be the manual
Right.
initial, because I'm pretty sure we got rid of that.
I agree. Yeah, when I first moved to Arizona, I was initialing all the labels and I was like, this seems silly.
Especially in today's practice.
Yeah.
Like you said, maybe when your dad was first practicing, but not anymore.
Well, when I first started practicing, I think there were only 14 drugs, so it wasn't that bad.
We just put prescription record since we're on this anyways.
Didn't we talk though about how in mail order the PICS initials usually go on the label? Oh, I guess if it was record, that would fix that.
Yeah, it would be broad enough, I would think.
Or do we want to go back to audit trail? We just need to make sure that it matches 402. However we made that change in 402, let's just make sure that it matches. Cam,
All right.
let's go back and look at that and make sure that it makes sense. Because I feel like, and it's been a while, that we had it audit trail versus even record.
If we put audit trail, Roger, do we have to define audit trail?
Well, so this is where Lori was going. I like is the audit trail sufficient to the inspector and other pharmacists as to who dispensed this thing, who did the final verification. And the audit trail could be a lot of different things, and I would hate to limit it, but we could do audit trail including but not limited to digital signatures, manual signatures, keystroke data and metadata in the computer system that is readily retrievable and indicates who the dispensing pharmacist was. I like it to be open-ended and be able to catch up with technology and so yes, I think you do need to find audit trail, and I think it just needs to be including but not limited to and provide examples.
And I think we need to determine like what really is necessary for patient safety, and like, does the patient care what's on the and a patient's not even going to know what initials on a label means. What we need to know is who performed it in the event that it was wrong from an accountability standpoint. Like, and that's what I get at when I think about like, who is the dispensing pharmacist? Like, who is the person that performed each of the steps of the check? Whether somebody performed the data entry and data review and somebody made the final compound and checked the accuracy of the final compound. I don't care if that's the same person necessarily, but we should know who that means for each step of the process. But I don't think it has to be on the label, as long as we can identify who did what.
Right. I think in a computer system where you've got scanners and the final verification is scanned to a person and that's retrievable, great. That doesn't have to be on the label. But if your computer system doesn't have a scanner at the final step, then manual initials might be your auto trail, but give the pharmacy the choice.
Or is it the compounding log, right? Does it have to be on the label? As long as it's a part of the record.
Well, remember though, these are just definitions for the whole
process.
Rules. So this isn't specific. These aren't compounding definitions that we're in right now. These are all the definitions.
Oh, they're not?
All the rules.
Okay, this is the full definitions. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
So we definitely need to look at this definition then and make sure that it makes sense. Knowing shared services and all that kind of stuff.
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot in these definitions that drive interpretation of the subsequent regulations. So the subsequent regulation says shared services are okay. Now I got to go back to the definition of shared services, which is in 110.
I know that we proposed like a bunch of edits to definitions a while ago. I don't know if we still have record of those.
Yeah, I have some here. I don't want to take us too far off course, but I have some comments on definitions.
Well, I think what I learned, and here's why I went to definitions. What I learned is that as we go through the different sections, 410, I couldn't view 410 in a vacuum. 410 is actually really short, and it relies on a lot of these definitions. And so I think the moral of the story is we can't look at definitions in a vacuum. So in Lori's case, you know, we got to make sure whatever 410 says, we got to make sure that's the same. And we can't look at the regulations in a vacuum either. So we need to go back and forth as we update the rules, which is what I did.
And I think that's part of where we get lost, right? So we add a section on shared services, and there's implications throughout other pieces of it, for example, right?
Yep.
And I don't think we always historically have done a good job in going back to the definitions to make sure that everything is really set up in a way that makes sense. Go ahead, Roger.
Cam, before you get here, can you go back to Federal Act?
Let me pull up the statute again, Roger.
Maybe that's what I was, because we talked about the word act before, but there is a definition of Federal Act. I know this is a statute, but this is a horrific statute. It just basically says anything federal, doesn't it?
Yep, I don't like it. We got to get the legislature to clean that up.
All right. There were just so many references to, I just want to see it one more time. All right, thank you.
Hey guys,
Yeah,
do we
because-
need to
yeah.
take a quick bio break? I thought we were going till noon. I actually have one as the time, but we've been going for 2 hours. Just want to be mindful of time and all that kind of stuff. Where people want to jump off if they need to and come back, that's fine too.
Lori, I'm gonna have to leave at 12:30 to pick up my kids. I can put it back on to listen in the car, but
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any difference.
Well, I really want
I
you to
think-
be present for the compounding discussion. So maybe at 12:30, if like we'll get through what we can on compounding and then move over to another topic because I think to me, Tennille, your feedback is imperative here.
Mhm. Lori, I have to drop off at 12:30.
Okay. We'll still have quorum, but I think we keep going till 1 for those of us that can be, as long as we don't go out of quorum.
If we're gonna go to 1, can we take a 5-minute break then?
Okay.
That was my point, Roger.
All right, let's do that.
Might need
Okay,
a
5 minutes. All right, Cam, you're back.
I am, yes.
Okay. All right, let's continue.
Mark, you back, buddy?
I am. All right, so same issue here. Class 5 environment, Class 7 environment references old versions of ISO and ANSI requirements. So I'm not sure though that effectively that they changed very much, but we want to look for those, and I can do that and just kind of do a side by side on the newer versions versus the older versions, like for biosafety cabinets. So I call that out. I think that's something we have to work on in the future. This looked out of place. There's a definition for limited service sterile pharmaceutical products pharmacy. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that's a license designation anymore.
No, I don't think we have that.
So I just struck it. I just don't think it's relevant anymore. Other designated personnel is sort of part of the review. And I don't know, I'm trying to think of all of the people that sometimes are in a pharmacy and making sure that we've given the board enough guidance to know, you know, these people from time to time are going to be in there. And as long as the pharmacist is on duty and the pharmacist thinks they need to be there and they're under the direct supervision of the pharmacist, I just want to make sure we have everything covered. You know, it's interesting, they talk about floor maintenance. I'm like, why just the floors? Why not just anything in the facility that needs to be fixed? Stuff like that. You know, why just telephone and computer repair? What if the robot needs to be fixed? Can we have the Script Pro robot guy in there? So I tried to make it more broad. Pharmacy law continuing education. It's not a requirement anymore, so I thought I'd strike it while I was in there, although it's not relevant to the charge that I was given.
It's not required anymore, but I believe we're going to be issuing pharmacy law CE hopefully by February.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Do we need to keep it in there?
You could leave it. I don't think it hurts. It's just a definition.
Is it used anywhere else other than here? Did you see, Mark?
It wasn't used in the section that I reviewed, but I just happened to catch it. Caught my eye when I was scrolling through.
We
I think
also
it should
do
be taken out.
I don't know, we issue orders with it though.
But we
Yeah,
don't
when you-
define
yeah.
any other type of CE. We
True.
don't define med error prevention CE.
Kristen's right. I didn't change that.
Who uses red
I didn't make-
sticks? I know it's a
I didn't
federal-
make any changes to that. And presumably someone who doesn't have a computer system would need a Red C stamp. Standard risk sterile pharmaceutical product doesn't have relevance in 2023. This is another reference to federal act that I tried to make more specific. And there's official compendium again. I missed that. But you could leave it if you wanted. And we're at the end of that document.
Can I make a suggestion since we're in this definitions? The definition for caregiver is way too complicated. I think that it mentions like a mother, son, brother, blah, blah, blah. I was thinking we could just change it to a person who cares for an infant or child or cares for someone who's sick or disabled. Because number one, I was thinking, what if you're not an adult and you're caring for an infant or a child? So I don't think that's necessary. And I don't think it's necessary to just say your husband, son, daughter, mother, father, whatever. Who knows if you're married and it's your significant other, you know? I
Could
just
be a
don't think it
neighbor.
makes
Maybe
sense.
your neighbor is acting as your agent.
Right. So just someone who cares for an infant or child or cares for someone who's sick or disabled.
Yeah,
Even
but
that's
then
not that eloquent, but I was just trying to get those two sections together.
But who's that definition for? It's for, you know, the pharmacists that are practicing. It's for us, you know, I mean, simple as caregiver means a person who cares for
Another
someone
person.
else. So another person, yeah, and
Yeah.
leave it at that, right? And
Yeah, or take it out. I mean, I don't even know if it's needed.
We use it in a number of other rules, but do we need a
Okay.
definition?
It's the common definition. I don't know if we need to.
because it gets into
Okay.
discussion, well, how do you know the person is sick, disabled, all these other things that leaves
Yeah.
a question, right?
Well,
Versus,
and sick is a pretty general term. Like
Mhm.
Yeah.
somebody has high blood pressure, if they don't have time to go pick up their prescription and they send their neighbor, is that sick?
Right. How about we take it out? And the common definition of caregiver, it's not anything different than people's are understanding generally.
Hey, Lori, just to clarify, I think there's a difference between agent and caregiver. And when we say a patient can do something, I think by law we imply a patient's agent can, and a neighbor is always going to, assuming authorized, is an agent. I think a caregiver is a different kind of person, a nurse or something like that, that may not have an agency relationship, but is providing care.
And a caregiver under the counseling component in 402, a pharmacy would be required to provide counseling.
Right, but a neighbor isn't necessarily a caregiver, but a nurse who's taking care of them would be with it, because I think those are different. Both people appropriately can pick up the prescription.
Are there any HIPAA implications for caregiver versus agent? Like, can we share HIPAA protected information with a caregiver?
You absolutely can. You just can, and this OCR is actually quite liberal. You just have to reasonably believe that this person has a caregiving relationship. I'm looking for the definition in the OCR right now, but it is very, very liberal and broad.
But notwithstanding that, there's been a bunch of press in the last week or two about pharmacies giving out data without warrants to police, and there have been all kinds of criticism about it. So yeah, yes, the law is there, but it's just sort of interesting.
Well, I read those articles and wait till CNN finds out about the prescription drug monitoring program. I mean, there's never been a pharmacist-patient right to privacy when it comes to law enforcement marching into my pharmacy claiming to be investigating an issue. I can't refuse prescription records to board inspectors or DEA agents if they say to me, I'm investigating a diversion, I need to see these records. I can't refuse that.
Don't they have to have a subpoena?
They have to have a subpoena to go into the PDMP.
Yeah,
they gotta have a court order now, Mark.
court
Court
order.
order. All right, court order. It's even bigger than a subpoena.
So CMS defines caregivers broadly as family members, friends, or neighbors who provide unpaid assistance to a person with a chronic illness or disabling condition. Is what I think there's lots of definitions.
I don't know why it has to be unpaid.
I don't know.
Here's the HIPAA privacy rule. permits covered entities to share with an individual's family member, other relative, close personal friend, or any other person identified by the individual, the information directly relevant to the involvement. And then it later goes on to, for example, for people who are incapacitated, the covered entity may use their reasonable judgment as to whether or not the person fits one of the definitions. The federal law is quite forgiving. But I like Kristen's point. You could do includes but is not limited to.
Any good thoughts? What I
still prefer very broad, generic, means a person who cares for another individual. Because it's really hard for a pharmacist to figure out. So
yeah.
I'm okay with that because that's essentially what it's saying anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, it throws everything out the door that you just read when they say, or anyone else. What's the point? You've now made it anything, so why define it?
Yeah. Yeah, the OCIR in their frequently asked questions even underlines the word anyone in their descriptions. Like OCR is like, we do not want to be the barrier to caregivers getting information that they need.
Okay.
Anything else on the definitions, guys?
No.
Save this. Is this where we're headed next, Lori?
Yeah, go ahead. Knowing that we have to stop at 12:30 and move to another topic since Tennille can't participate. But let's get down what we
All
can.
right. So here's where we are, B subsection 1. This was a tough one for me to read because it says all substances used for compounding that are received, stored, or used by the pharmacy permittee. It doesn't say all active ingredients or all pharmaceutical ingredients. So what I thought was reasonable, and people can disagree, is subsection A says, the substance has to meet the requirements as described in sections 503A and 503B of the United States Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And that's where your active pharmaceutical ingredient do's and do nots fall. And then for all of your excipients and other things, are high quality, such as chemically pure, you can read, analytical reagent, certified ACS or food chemical codex grade, or are obtained from a source in the professional judgment of the pharmacist is acceptable and reliable. And there have been countless examples of things in which C was important in this state, particularly when you get into allergen extracts. And so I thought all three of these met the burden. And regardless of what you feel about official compendium and which ones described, Section 503A and 503B will bring in as part of its requirements a component that these things have a USP monograph or two other acceptable reasons. So A mirrors federal law, and B and C allow for put some guardrails in place generally or professional judgment, and so that's why I made that change. suggesting that change.
I think that USP has some guidelines here too, that not everything must have a USP or NF monograph, but comes with a valid C of A, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if it makes sense to also include that.
I wouldn't, because those requirements are for active pharmaceutical ingredients. And if we wanted to change number 1, all substances for compounding that are active pharmaceutical ingredients, then I'm with you, but I want to make it more broad.
Any other thoughts on that?
Okay. This is something
Hey,
that
wait a second.
go
Let's
ahead.
go back to that for a second. So, Kim, thinking through some of the issues that we've had in the past, we had an issue where somebody was using, I think veterinary grade products
Yes.
for human use.
Uh-huh.
Would this allow that?
C would not.
Because it would be outside of the professional judgment.
It would be.
Okay.
That's where I'd discipline them, is based upon a violation of C. That, it said research purposes only, not to be used in humans. You compounded them for humans. What part of your judgment thought that was acceptable?
Right.
And if they were able to define it, and you're like, oh, holy crap, no, I get based upon this facts and circumstances, you're right. But that's where you get them on C.
Okay. I just want to make sure that there isn't too broad of language there, that there isn't some sort of standards.
If APIs are only under subsection A, should we not identify that so there's no confusion? And I'm saying that only because A, B, and C, it has an or under B, so that's where I'm coming from with that comment.
But C is important for allergen extracts, and even the FDA has guidance documents like, yeah, we get this doesn't fit 503A very well, but we're still okay with allergen extracts. So even the FDA recognizes there are things that we compound that just don't fit anything, but that we're still okay with it. And so I always liked C. C was important.
Go ahead, Kim.
Three. Three is something that I spent a lot of time on. 3 predates 2013, when the Drug Quality and Security Act was written, and we used to be able to compound without being a 503B for doctors' offices, for hospital and office administration. What I wanted to do was modernize this and make it more conforming to the federal law, which still allows veterinary office use compounding. So that's the intention for the change here in number 3.
Mark, do we need to include that it only is that list of approved products that the FDA publishes that are allowed for office use compounding?
Does the FDA restrict it for veterinarians?
Yeah, so the FDA has a list of drugs used for certain species in certain concentrations only, and those are the only things that are legally allowed to be compounded for office use to veterinarians. There's other things that are added to the list eventually, so we'd need to say like this in future editions.
Well, you couldn't say this in future editions. But what you could say, which isn't offensive to R11, is to say compliant with federal law.
Pam, didn't we just approve a policy for veterinary compounding office use?
Yeah, substantive policy. The board did approve that.
I don't remember if this, I'm not sure this is consistent with that.
I did not look at the substantive policy when I redlined this, and so that's completely possible. Oh, and I forgot, and I don't want to be disingenuous. I also added shared services to this.
I'm in favor of the shared services, but I don't think it should be in the same place as the veterinary. If we're going to deal with it, let's deal with it up front.
Fair enough. Do we want, okay, so here's an option, and we have 3 minutes before Keneal and Kevin, who also compounds, have to leave. Do we want to relook at number 3 in the context of making it conform with substantive policy guidance for veterinary compounding, and then add a new section about shared services agreement for debate at a future meeting?
Let me send you that substantive policy. I don't know if you have a copy of it, Mark, but I'll send that to you. It hasn't been posted, published.
I was
by
gonna
the
say,
Secretary
I was
of
gonna
State.
say, I was gonna say, I don't see it even posted.
Yeah,
Kim.
it's not stamped and posted yet. So it's not
Okay,
official,
why don't I-
but the board did approve it, but I'll send that over to you, Mark, for your review.
All right, why don't I take another run at 3 and rather than be a slave to the current language in 3, maybe we could just redo the whole thing.
I emailed the list of drugs from the FDA document to Mark, Cam, and Lori if you guys want to distribute it to the rest of the group.
Thank you. All right, so I'll take another run at 3.
Yeah, let's look at the substantive policy, make sure that aligns.
Okay.
Cam, being mindful of Tennille's time and Kevin's time, where do we want to go next off of compounding? Do you want to do naloxone
Naloxone's
or
a pretty
DSCS or
yeah.
DSCSA?
Yeah, I can just speak to naloxone right now. We do have a bill in place to eliminate the burden to report it to the PMP, eliminating a barrier that would open up distribution channels for that drug. And once that is more set in stone and heading in the right direction, we can then repeal some of the rules that kind of mirror that statute. So that's an easy fix. If you're okay with that, I'll just move forward with that part.
Cam, can you give 1 minute on why it's a barrier? I just want to make sure we all hear it.
So several years ago, I think around 2018-ish time period, DHS wanted to track how many dispensations were taking place on naloxone because there was a group formed because opioid became a problem. And in order to save lives, in order to track the number of lives opioid antagonists are saving, they wanted to track how many were dispensed by pharmacies. Inadvertently, the language also incorporated anybody that dispensed opioid antagonist, and that wasn't the intent at the time. So right now, emergency departments, clinics, all those guys having cold feet because the law is stated this way, and they think they're being held accountable to it, and they're hesitant in freely dispensing opioid antagonist. The only folks that were using the data was DHS. Nobody else had visibility. They used it and they shared it on their dashboard. But for the last couple of years, they haven't used that data. So last April, May, we finally convinced DHS to, hey, if you're not using the data, let's get rid of it because it is a barrier. So we finally got their buy-in. By the time we got their buy-in, it was too late to piggyback off of a bill last year because the train left the station. So this year we did get support from Senator Shope to eliminate that barrier. Hopefully we can get Representative Montenegro on the House side to run a similar bill on that side so that we can, and to make it effective upon the governor's signature. So hopefully by March, before March, we can eliminate that barrier and have opioid antagonist readily available and distributed. As you know, it's over the counter, but anytime you type a label up, it becomes kind of like a prescription, and you got to follow all the guidelines of a prescription.
Thanks. That's what I wanted to hear. Thanks.
Anything else on that? No. Cool. Yeah, no, it's a good thing. The naloxone antagonist, the naloxone is a good thing to deregulate that component as it moved over the counter. The second part is, Larry, can I move on from there? Are we okay? Cool.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the Drug Supply Chain Securities Act, as you guys know, has been delayed till next year. But by the time we get done with our rules and stuff like that, it may take a little time. And we may be right up against it being enacted anyways. But I did draft something for your review. And this is where I may need Mark's and Roger's help as to defining it. So I did define Drug Supply Chain Securities Act means an interoperable electronic tracing of prescription products. I didn't invent this wheel. I kind of just picked the language off of several different sources to make this definition. So if you guys can review it, see if there's a concern, if it's all inclusive, if it's missing anything, or is it too detailed?
Before we move forward, is it okay if I drop for another meeting? This is Emily.
And I think we're good. We should still have, what, 8 of 11, so we're in quorum even without Tennille and Kevin.
Yeah,
And Emily.
we can always bring this back for final review as well. So
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to drop.
thank you.
Kim, can I ask a question? Just level setting for my knowledge. Is this included in your permit as resident and non-resident permits, or is this in addition to
It's
the permit required here?
no, there's no permit required for this. This is as the drug is manufactured, distributed through a wholesaler, third-party logistics, and then through a pharmacy, ultimately sold to a patient. It's tracked and traced from the beginning of inception to.
Okay, when I was reading it, like A starts off, permit is required. So I just wanted to make sure that I understood it's the same
no.
permit that you already have. It's just the tracking and tracing that's different.
Yeah, so none of this is new language.
You just added the definition.
I
at the
just
top
added
there.
the definition, and then in part of that, I added E1. So it was R423-601 E1, E and E1. So that's why I put that section in there to show you the entire
Gotcha. Okay.
global picture. But going back to the definition, are there any concerns with the definition?
So, Cam, is there a reason we're not referencing the federal law? I mean, that we're saying the act, which refers to a specific federal law.
I do reference it here. Every person involved in a drug supply chain distribution of a prescription-only drug or controlled substance shall comply with 21 U.S.C. 360 EE1. So it is referencing the exact section.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we don't want to just define the DSCSA as 21 U.S.C. blah, 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 and go through it. And then later on, you can just say she'll comply with DSCSA. And
we could do that.
Do we need to put the date in there for Mike and Mark?
I think we do need to put the date in there, and I'll get that reference.
This is a federal law. This is not a reference entity that we're referencing. I'm just raising it. It's different than USP.
Yeah. Roger's right. The R11 requires when you refer to material by reference that generally come from a private entity that's not, referencing federal law.
Okay.
So the feds would be allowed to amend 360 EEE-1, and then that would still be the controlling law. But if there were a publication that resulted from that, And this is the whole, why is Fiora Null scheduled and Fiora Set isn't scheduled, even though they both have butalbital in them? Because the DEA publishes a list of exceptions every year. And when you reference that publication that is not a regulation or a statute, then you have to give it a date.
Thank you.
So if federal law modifies this 21 USC,
It would still control. The amendment to EEE1 would still control. But if EEE1 required a publication every year that included a list of exceptions, like the DEA example I gave you, and that doesn't have a CFR reference or a statutory reference, then you'd have to describe to the reader, where do I go to get that and what version are we using? But referencing 21 USC 360, everyone knows how to get that. And you're using,
They do.
obviously, the current published version.
and the board would have enforceability, even if it modified going forward.
Right, the board would have to use the then current law at the time of the infraction.
Okay.
So really just for my own knowledge, Roger and Mark, so if we reference something that isn't law, federal or state, that's where we need to have the publication date. So like ACIP, CDC, USP, any of those kinds of things, that's where, if we had it in our rules, that would be the expectation from an administrative law requirement.
Correct. I don't know if you heard me correct.
Yep.
Thank you. Good law lesson today.
So I'll look at the definition, Roger, per your suggestion, and modify that to reflect the federal law.
I mean, truthfully, DSCSA is just another, is similar to the Controlled Substance Act or the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, any of those words. It's just another law.
Okay. As far as E and E1, any concerns?
I didn't see anyone that with it. I think that to be fair, they're going to have to comply with all of it.
Yep.
I mean, it's a federal law.
Yeah.
I like your description, though. It's a nice one.
Oh, thank you. Okay, that was an easy discussion. So thank you, guys. Anything else we want to circle back to, Madam Chair?
I guess in advance of the next meeting, is there any other topics? I know we're going to need to have a fair amount of time probably to finish this compounding discussion. And then obviously review the additional language for the transfer to try and finalize that. Is there any other priority topics that the task force members would like to prioritize?
I would like to throw one out, Madam Chair. I know I'm working on packet number 2, myself and my rule writer. And if it's ready, we want to probably visit that and make sure we've incorporated all our thoughts and processes before I put it before the board for final approval.
So review that next packet for filing.
Yeah, our first packet is being introduced to GERC next Wednesday.
Okay.
Discussion, and then the ruling on that would be the week after, but next week is a study session. But packet 2 is being worked on as we speak.
Okay.
And that may take a lot of time because it was pretty extensive.
Cam, I know there was a discussion during the items for a previous or for a future agenda to discuss the delegation language around can technicians take declination of counseling? I don't know if that is a full board discussion based on the current rule, or if that is a discussion that this group should have.
We can start it off at this group and make a recommendation if that's what it is. The full board will have to discuss it at the end and approve it if you guys see that that's the way we want to go. Right now, as the law is written, if that prescription is new to that pharmacy, they need to be counseled on it. And I don't know if we can sway away from that requirement today.
Okay.
Could we talk about if it's a continuing therapy, just a different dose?
If it's a new strength or directions, it's considered new.
But that was where we were trying to get around in our other discussion. I just couldn't remember where we landed.
Yeah, we can wordsmith that better, but if I transferred it from pharmacy A and to pharmacy B and pharmacy B never filled that for that individual, they would have to do the counseling.
Understand.
That
I'm
goes
not
to that
against
shared
counseling by
service
any
one.
means.
That goes to that shared service one where if it's not a transfer on the common database, then they wouldn't have to do the counseling.
There you go, Roger.
What about the fact that mail orders get the printout to the patient of what?
That's included in the law?
Well, that's counseling.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, maybe because that all the counseling stuff is in our rule, not in law, right?
Not in statute. Yeah, it's in rule.
Can we bring up counseling? Because that was a discussion, and see if there's any recommendations that this group wants to make to the board.
Yep.
Okay. Do we want to try and set a date quickly for the next one? Ideally, to continue the compounding discussion, I think it would be good to have one more before the next board meeting, if that's possible.
It may be. I also have to squeeze in the Just Culture meeting, Madam Chair. So that's been lingering around. So I need to throw that in there somewhere.
Okay. The next board meeting is the
Mid-February.
14th.
Yeah. Want me to shoot out a doodle here this afternoon to you guys with several dates?
Yeah, let me get with you, Cam. I'll give you some suggestions
Sure.
first. Okay. All right.
Anything else, guys?
Happy holidays, everybody.
You too, my friend.
Absolutely. I appreciate everybody's attendance. I think it was a very productive discussion. Again, Mark, thank you for taking the time to put together the language like we asked at the last meeting. Really appreciate it. It's helpful to the discussion. So happy holidays.
Thank you. All right.
Happy holidays.
guys.
I'll talk to you soon.
See you all soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.